Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today we're diving into a tool of foreign policy so powerful it can reshape global trade from an office in Washington, D.C. without a single soldier being deployed. We're talking about secondary sanctions. In our interconnected economy, these measures act like economic shockwaves, and understanding them is key to understanding how modern geopolitical power really works. So what exactly are they? To get it, let's first quickly define a primary sanction. That's the simple version. Country A is mad at Country B, so it forbids its own citizens and companies from doing business with Country B. Straightforward. But secondary sanctions cast a much wider net. They don't just target Country B. They target anyone, anywhere in the world who continues to do business with Country B. The punishment isn't a direct fine for that transaction. Instead, the sanctioning country, let's say the United States, delivers an ultimatum. Stop trading with our target, or we will cut you off from our economy. Given the central role of the US dollar and its financial system in virtually all global trade, this is a threat few international businesses can afford to ignore. It's a my way or the highway approach that forces companies in Europe, Asia, or anywhere else to choose between doing business with the sanctioned country or doing business with the United States. Proponents argue this is a vital force multiplier, a way to address serious national security threats without resorting to war. But critics see it as a massive overreach, an attempt to apply one country's laws to the entire planet. To see how this plays out in the real world, let's look at some history. Our first case study, Iran. The story of US sanctions against Iran is long, but secondary sanctions really came into their own in 1996 with the Iran and Libya Sanctions Act. This law was designed to stop foreign companies from investing in Iran's energy sector. This immediately sparked a huge fight with European allies. They saw it as an illegal extraterritorial application of US law. The European Union even passed something called a blocking statute, which, in theory, made it illegal for European companies to comply with these American sanctions. Fast forward to the 2010s. The dispute over Iran's nuclear program was heating up, and the US rolled out a new, much more powerful wave of secondary sanctions. These targeted Iran's lifeblood, its energy, oil, shipping, and banking sectors. The impact was devastating. Iranian oil exports plummeted by 1.4 million barrels per day. Foreign banks and companies fled the country. There was a temporary pause in 2015 with the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, where the US agreed to suspend these sanctions. But in 2018, the US pulled out of the deal and slapped all the sanctions right back on. This threw global business into chaos and put the EU in a terrible position. On one hand, its blocking statute was still in effect, technically protecting EU companies doing legitimate business with Iran. But in reality, the fear of losing access to the massive US market was far more powerful. Most major European firms chose to self-sanction. They pulled out of Iran even if they weren't legally required to. They were caught in a legal trap, violate US sanctions, and get cut off from the global financial system, or comply with them and risk penalties back home under the EU's blocking statute. In the end, the money talked. The US market was too big to risk. This case perfectly demonstrates the chilling effect of secondary sanctions. The threat alone is often enough. Now let's turn to North Korea, a case study in complete financial isolation. For decades, the US had sanctions on the country, but after its nuclear weapons tests, things escalated dramatically. In 2017, a US executive order created a powerful secondary sanctions regime. It authorized the US Treasury to sanction any individual or company, regardless of their nationality, for doing business in key North Korean industries like energy, finance, or construction. It also targeted foreign banks that knowingly handled significant transactions for North Korea. The goal was simple: to completely sever North Korea's ties to the international financial system it used to fund its weapons programs. The threat of being blacklisted by the U.S. Treasury was enough to make almost every international bank and company run for the hills. The economic impact was severe. North Korea's main exports, minerals, seafood, textiles, were targeted, and its export revenue collapsed. But the North Korea case also shines a light on the unintended consequences. The intense pressure led to a boom in illegal trade channels, often with help from neighboring China. This not only weakened the sanctions' effectiveness, but also fueled corruption and crime. More troubling are the humanitarian costs. There is growing concern that these sweeping sanctions, despite having humanitarian exemptions, have made it incredibly difficult for aid to get into the country. Banks are so afraid of accidentally violating a rule that they refuse to handle even legitimate humanitarian transactions, leading to increased food insecurity and suffering for the general population. This brings us to the most recent and dramatic example: the sanctions on Russian oil. Let's imagine a near-future scenario based on current events. In October 2025, in response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the US, EU, and UK imposed comprehensive sanctions on Russia's biggest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. The goal is to choke off the Kremlin's war funding. But this time, they include an explicit, powerful threat: secondary sanctions against anyone who buys crude oil from these companies. The effect is immediate. Indian refiners, who had been happily buying up discounted Russian oil, suddenly halt all new purchases. They can't risk being penalized by Western banks. China's state-owned oil giants do the same. In an instant, millions of barrels of oil are at risk of being taken off the global market. Global oil prices surge 6%. This single move sets off a cascade of ripple effects. First, market volatility. The price spike shows just how sensitive the energy market is to these geopolitical moves. Second, supply chain realignment. India and China are now forced to scramble for new suppliers. They turn to the Middle East, the US, and West Africa. But this creates new logistical headaches and drives up costs for shipping and insurance. Third, there are direct economic costs for third-party countries. India was getting a great deal on Russian oil, but the threat of secondary sanctions forces it to buy more expensive crude, hurting its economy. This shows how these measures punish countries that aren't even the primary target. Fourth, it demonstrates the raw power of the financial system. The US dollar is the plumbing of global trade. Even countries like India and China, which may not politically align with the West, cannot afford to be cut off from the dollar-based system. Their companies must comply. And finally, it fuels the rise of a shadow fleet. To get around sanctions, Russia has been using a fleet of old, aging tankers with murky ownership to transport its oil secretly. The new sanctions are designed to crack down on this, but it becomes a constant game of cat and mouse. The use of such a powerful tool is, unsurprisingly, bogged down in legal and political controversy. The main argument against secondary sanctions is their extraterritorial nature. Many countries, including close US allies, see them as a violation of their national sovereignty. They also clash with the entire framework of the World Trade Organization, or WTO. The WTO is built on principles of non-discrimination and free trade. Unilateral sanctions that target one country are the exact opposite of that. While countries could technically challenge these measures at the WTO, its dispute system has been paralyzed for years. The US also argues that these actions are justified under a national security exception in WTO rules, a claim that remains highly debatable. We've also seen how countermeasures like the EU's blocking statute have largely been a paper tiger. In the standoff between a regional regulation and access to the world's largest market, the market almost always wins. For the corporations caught in the middle, this has created a fiendishly complex compliance nightmare. The risks are enormous: massive fines, frozen assets, and reputational ruin. To survive, companies have to pour resources into sophisticated risk mitigation. They perform enhanced due diligence, vetting every single partner and customer to make sure they aren't on a sanctions list. They invest in supply chain transparency to track the origin of every component. They diversify their suppliers and markets to avoid being too dependent on one region. And they keep teams of lawyers on speed dial, just to navigate the constantly changing rules. But the ripple effects go far beyond corporate balance sheets. There is a profound humanitarian cost. Sanctions are supposed to target regimes, but they often hit civilians the hardest. As we saw in North Korea, by disrupting trade and finance, they can cause shortages of food, medicine, and other essentials. Even when humanitarian exemptions are written into the law, the chilling effect on banks means that private actors are too scared to facilitate aid for fear of falling foul of the rules. Perhaps the most significant long-term consequence is the push for de-dollarization. The repeated use of the US dollar as a weapon has given countries like China and Russia a powerful incentive to break free from their reliance on it. They are actively working to build alternative financial systems and promote the use of their own currencies in trade. While the dollar's dominance isn't in immediate danger, the trend is clear. A world less reliant on the dollar would mean a world where US secondary sanctions lose their teeth. And it could have major consequences for the US economy, like higher borrowing costs. Ultimately, this all contributes to a potential fragmentation of global trade. We risk splintering into rival economic blocs, each with its own rules and payment systems, undoing decades of globalization and creating a more volatile and less efficient global economy. In conclusion, secondary sanctions are a double-edged sword. They are an undeniably powerful tool, allowing nations to exert immense economic pressure without firing a shot, as the recent Russian oil sanctions demonstrate. But their ripple effects are vast, unpredictable, and often destructive. They destabilize markets, realign global supply chains, and impose heavy costs on neutral countries. They challenge the very foundations of international law and the multilateral trading system. As geopolitics become more turbulent, the debate over these economic weapons will only intensify. The challenge is weighing their intended purpose against their very real and often unintended consequences. The ripples from these sanctions are not just economic. They are actively shaping the future of global commerce and international relations in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online.